Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Hertsmere. I'm Jeremy Newmark. I'm the leader of Hertsmere Borough Council, and I'm joined to my right by Councillor Steve Jarvis, who is the leader of Hertfordshire County Council. We congratulate him on his relatively recent election to that post. To my left is Sajida Bijlay, who is the Chief Executive here at Hertsmere, and on the right is Angie Ridgewell, who is the Chief Executive of Hertfordshire County Council. We've been joined today by a number of borough and county councillors, in addition to all of you. Councillor Mark Amron, Councillor Chris Shenton, Deputy Leader of the Council, and Councillor Maurice Bright. I think I saw Councillor Jacob, who is one of the county councillors for Boreham Wood. Get the technical stuff out the way. A fire evacuation procedure. On hearing the fire alarm, please leave the building immediately using the nearest available exit as designated by the emergency exit signs. Do not under any circumstances use the lift. The assembly point is in the car park outside the building adjacent to the mini roundabout. You should not attempt to re-enter the building until you are advised that it is safe to do so. Thank you very much for taking the time to attend this evening's meeting, which has been organised in order to enable all of you as local residents, businesses and representatives of community groups, town and parish councils to hear an outline of where we're at in the local government reorganisation process as it affects us here in Hertsmere and in Hertfordshire, and most importantly to let us have your feedback, your thoughts, and ask us any questions that we are able to address. I think in total we've got nearly 90 participants, comprising both you in the room and a number of people who are watching the webcast online. I think that there is some kind of traffic problem on the main road, so it may well be that there are more people who would join us in person as the meeting goes on. If we could go on to the first slide, please, which sets out the agenda for the discussion. Thank you. Between Councillor Jarvis and myself, we're going to do our best to give you a little bit of context, set out the vision that has been collectively developed by the 11 councils across Hertfordshire and the Police and Crime Commissioner, an understanding of where we are along the journey and the stages that we still have to complete, the specific options that are now on the table for the future of local government in this area, and as much time as possible for questions and feedback at the end. It is an incredibly involved and complex process. We're going to do our best today to give you the key points in as simple and digestible a form as possible. We do have a microsite on the council website, and there are various resources on the county council website that will help those of you who are so inclined to go into the rabbit hole that is the minutiae of the detail of local government reorganisation. But I think the main purpose of this evening's meeting is to give you an understanding on where we've reached in Hertfordshire and the possible options that sit in front of us. So if we can jump to the next slide, please. Really briefly, and I'm really not going to do the PowerPoint karaoke thing of reading slides out, because I don't like that, but in a nutshell, what happened was at the end of 2020, before. The government, in a speech actually from the Chancellor rather than the Secretary of State for Local Government, set out a series of plans to change the way that local councils operate. There were two elements to the announcement. The first one, which was an expected one, was an expansion of the government's plans to devolve key services from the centre out around the country to the regions and the nations, and the mechanism for doing that was going to be through mayoral strategic combined authorities, similar to those that already exist in the metro mayor areas like Greater Manchester, or for that matter London itself, with an expansion of the concept of directly elected mayors. That was set out in the government's manifesto. It was expected and was announced. The additional component that was not part of the government's manifesto, and I think it's fair to say was not expected, was a commitment to effectively abolish the two-tier structure of local government that currently exists in areas like this, where you have some services delivered by a county council and other services delivered by a borough council like our own. The rationale that the government gave was primarily based around creating a model in which the future of key local services moves from one in which we see continual cuts and threats to one in which we enter an era of financial sustainability for local government. That's why the 11 council leaders in this county are now working together on a joint plan to reshape local government according to the various criteria and parameters that central government have sent out. And we have what is now a statutory obligation following the publication of the English Devolution Act to deliver that to central government as a set of final proposals by the end of November this year. A very tight time frame indeed. We can move on to the next slide. I think, as we've said in all of the discourse around this, this will be one of the most significant changes to local government in the past 50 years. It is about decentralising power, but equally it is about driving local growth, growing our economy, ensuring that we're able to deliver the housing and key services that people need. I've talked about the key provisions already, and the key part of the timeline is that the primary legislation that will actually enact the major parts of the process behind the delivery of these changes is anticipated in the very early part of next year. We could move on to the next slide, and I will pass over to Steve.
Thanks very much. I think, as Jeremy has set out, the government has decided that a reorganisation of local government is an important part of increasing growth, something which I think there is widespread agreement is something the country needs to do. So Hertfordshire is faced with reorganisation of local government, and that's something which I think we have to show that we are ready to do, and the councils working together have been setting out to do that. As Jeremy has also said, this was last done, I think, something over 50 years ago, and the expectation is that what we put in place over the next few years will have a similar sort of lifetime. So this is not an opportunity that will come around frequently, and therefore it's an opportunity that we take and an opportunity that we get right. And clearly it's important not only that we deliver the potential to grow the economy that the government hopes this will achieve, and that we deliver the constructive change to local government, but we also do that in a way that reflects the importance of our local communities. And there are many local communities across Hertfordshire with their own distinctive features. Indeed, in most of the districts there are several communities with distinctive features. So it's not as if we are starting from a position where we currently are organised just around single communities, but it's important that we understand the distinctiveness of those communities in whatever we set out to build in future. Can we move to the next slide, please? I mean, most of what it says on this slide is I guess, is not contentious. We clearly need to be designing services around the people for whom we're delivering them. Reorganisation of local government is certainly an opportunity to reduce duplication and make it clearer about who does what. I think we're all very well aware, all of us involved in local government, that the current division of responsibilities between the county council and district and borough councils doesn't make a lot of sense in some areas. There's areas where even those of us involved occasionally wonder which side of the line things fall on, and it's therefore not surprising that citizens find it difficult to understand which council does what, who is responsible for what, and that's not great. And secondly, there are clearly some things which are done several times which could be done fewer times. But we need to do that whilst looking at the places that are involved. In terms of the economic potential that exists in terms of individual places, there are some parts of Hertfordshire which have strengths in particular sectors, in life science and the creative industries and advanced manufacturing are probably the things that Hertfordshire is known for, but there are particular parts of the county where they have strengths. Clearly, this area is more focused on creative industries. Other parts of the county are more focused on life sciences. But it's also important, as the last point there, that we make sure that we engage with residents and that whatever we put in place is shaped by their concerns and their requirements. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So currently we have a two-tier system. We have one county council and we have 10 district and borough councils. And the intention is to move to a situation where in each part of the county there will be a single council that is responsible for the services which are currently delivered by both those councils. There's a bit of complexity around there about the strategic authorities that Jeremy mentioned, but essentially there will be one council. So there will be an end to the question about which council is responsible for this service, who delivers that service. And that is intended, and indeed should deliver better accountability, it should deliver better outcomes, and it should generate some efficiencies, because there are things that are being done in some cases 10 times in Hertfordshire, which could be done fewer times, whilst not detracting from that localism in the area where it matters. And all the councils have been working since the government first raised this requirement, have been working together to try and determine what the best arrangements for the county should be. And if we can have the next slide, please. So the model is to unify services, to improve governance, so transparency about who is responsible for what, to provide efficiencies, and to deliver better outcomes through better planning and collaboration. But as I've said, we need to do that around people and communities, and we need to make sure that we base it on places and that we work together to achieve this. So can we have the next slide, please? So in terms of the present position, as I've said, we currently have a county council, we have 10 district and borough councils, and we have innumerable town and parish councils. Somebody probably knows how many there are, but I'm afraid I don't. There's a very large number across the county as a whole. The county council delivers services for children, so that's children's social care, it's support for special educational needs and disabilities, and related services. It delivers adult care services, so that's generally seen as being for older people, but actually a significant amount about that is supporting working age adults with disabilities. And those two services represent in cost terms something like 75% of what local government spends across Hertfordshire. Growth and environment, the biggest bit there, the bit of the county council services that everybody notices and has an opinion on, but as everyone uses, are highways. But that also includes waste disposal, it includes some bus services, and things of that sort. We deal with public health, community protection, which is largely the fire service, and trading standards. The County Council operates libraries, and it operates registration services, and there we're getting down to the fairly detailed level, which most people won't see very, very often. Districts and boroughs collect the council tax and deal with registering people. The district and borough activity, which probably people think of first, is planning, deciding what can be built where, housing and homelessness. Some of the councils in Hertfordshire have council houses and some don't, but all have responsibility for housing and homelessness. Parking, car parks and all the paraphernalia associated with those, emptying bins, licensing, pest control, environmental health and leisure, so leisure centres and swimming pools. And there's one of the, I think that a couple of those highlight some of the confusion about the present scheme, in that both trading standards and environmental health have responsibilities in terms of regulating the way in which some of the businesses operate, but it's pretty difficult to understand exactly where their responsibilities start and end. And then town and parish councils, I think statutorily are responsible for allotments and cemeteries, but in practice most of them do far more than that. They get involved in local events, they get involved in parks, things like clocks and war memorials. So there are those three tiers, and I'm not sure if I'm stealing what it says on someone else's slide later on, but I think it's fair to say that what we're talking about are changes combining the first two of those columns, the county and district services. There are no plans to change what town and parish councils do as part of this, but there may be some consequent changes that the new unitary councils want to discuss with the towns and parishes. So that hopefully sets out how things work currently and how some of that might be affected. Hope I haven't trampled all over what you're going to talk about next, Jeremy.
Not at all. So if we can move on to the next slide, we'll go from the sort of current slightly convoluted and confused scenario that Steve expertly laid out to what the government would like to see in terms of the new arrangements. As I said at the outset of this meeting, one key part of the change will be the creation of strategic combined mayoral authorities. That's not what tonight is largely about, but the reason I say it's one of the more exciting parts of the proposals is because the new directly elected mayors and strategic authorities underneath them will have the ability to effectively bid to government to take on responsibility for almost any policy area that is currently centralised, from transport to DWP services, whatever it is, and deliver those on a local or perhaps better described as a sub-regional level. They will also have the ability to negotiate devolution deals, which are effectively funding packages from government to help deliver those services and to drive economic growth within their localities. One thing that is worth mentioning that will be very specific, almost certainly to Hertfordshire, is that most of these authorities will be called combined authorities because they will combine geographies from more than one county council area. And whilst Hertfordshire is in discussion with some of our neighbours to look at the possibility of a larger geography for a combined mayoral authority, for a whole host of reasons that are beyond the scope of our conversation here, it is highly likely that as a county with a population of 1.25 million, projected to grow to sort of over 1.6 million within a relatively short space of time, we will almost certainly end up with a combined mayoral authority and an elected mayor that covers simply the existing geography of the current county. The biggest change in many ways will be the move to the new unitary authorities, which will effectively do what it says on the tin. They will unify that whole range of local services that currently sits under the county and district and borough columns that you saw in the previous slide, a kind of one-stop shop for local service provision. We don't yet know how many of those we will have across Hertfordshire, but we will say a little bit more about that as this presentation goes on. And then, as already mentioned, the town and parish councils will continue where they currently exist. Many of them may take on an increased significance because they will become the most local point of call and point of access to local government within individual neighbourhoods. It is also likely that the new unitary authorities will have neighbourhood committees or local area committees that will work closely, at least in theory, with town and parish councils to enhance service delivery and connectivity really on a hyperlocal neighbourhood by neighbourhood level. We can move on, please. Okay, let's get into where we're up to. The 10 borough district councils, plus the county council, plus the police and crime commissioner, submitted an interim plan to central government on the 20th of March. At that point, government asked us to provide very broad outlines as to what might be sensible and possible for our area. That plan outlined a series of options and permutations ranging from a single unitary authority, I called it a mega council, covering the entire geography and population of Hertfordshire, 1.25 million, to various permutations of 2, 3 and 4 unitary authorities, slicing up Hertfordshire in a variety of different ways. If we can move on to the next slide. The government has set out a series of criteria for the way unitary councils need to be constructed. The first one is self-evident from everything we've told you so far. They need to establish a single tier of local government. The second one is a set of criteria around size, and there's been, it's fair to say, a slight shifting of the goalposts on this since it was originally announced last winter, and the guiding principle is that the new unitaries must be the right size to improve efficiencies, the kind of efficiencies that will ensure we get to that sustainable funding position for provision of local services and local government that I talked about earlier. Some people have set out 500,000 population size. Others have said that's too large and have been talking around the 300,000 mark. Others have actually said that in order to really drive those efficiencies, you need to be looking at in excess of 650,000, perhaps approaching 750,000. Government have said that they are open to population sizes for new unitaries of any size, but it will be up to the proponents and supporters, particularly of the smaller size unitaries, to build the case, particularly the financial and economic sustainability cases for deviating from those guidelines. The prioritisation of high quality and sustainable public services, I think, speaks for itself. Everybody involved in this process sees it as an opportunity to ensure that we in local government are able to deliver the highest possible quality services to our residents and businesses. The government has placed a particular imperative upon local authorities in two-tier areas being able to demonstrate that these proposals have emerged out of a process of collaboratively working together. To the extent to which they have said ministers who will make the final decision will give far greater weight to proposals that emerge from such a collaborative process than proposals that are submitted from individual councils. And that's a key reason why we in Hertfordshire, even though we don't all necessarily agree about the precise number of unitary authorities we want to see here, are creating what I've called a big tent framework, where we are presenting the different options under one umbrella so that we can demonstrate that they have all been looked at and worked through in this collaborative manner and will thus be given greater weight by ministers. And the final point, which in many ways I think is the most important point, is the notion that the new councils, the new unitaries, need to actually enhance and deliver stronger community engagement, better commitment to localism and genuine opportunities for neighbourhood empowerment. I think this is a recognition of the danger that whilst larger councils may well deliver economic efficiencies and cost savings, if they're not constructed in the right way with a sensitivity to community engagement and neighbourhood empowerment, the risk is that the price of those financial efficiencies is a loss of that connection between local government, your local councillors and local people. Steve, over to you. Sorry, if it's okay, we're going to take questions at the end. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, I think it's obviously better if we take all the questions at the end. So, when will local government review happen in Hertfordshire? There are a number of places where it is happening in advance of Hertfordshire. And I think it's probably fair to say that what's set out on the screen is currently what the government describes as its desired plan, its most likely plan. So we had some engagement with some stakeholders in July. The public engagement is taking place now. This is what's happening here today. There is then a need to look at what results we get from our engagement with the public, as well as the detailed work that the council, all the officers of all the councils have done to look at at how we would achieve the combination of the councils in Hertfordshire, what that would mean in terms of the way services could be delivered, what that would mean in terms of the financial position. There is then the decision will have to be made by each of the councils in Hertfordshire about which of the options which will be included in the final submission they support. And each of the councils will make their own decisions about how they do that. So in Hertsmere, it's a decision to be made by the full council and the cabinet. There will be a similar process at the county council. There will be a debate by the full council, and then the final decision taken by the cabinet, advised by the council. And that's a reflection, I think, both in Hertsmere and at the county council of the legal arrangements. So there will be an opportunity for the full council to have a say in advance of the cabinet, which is the one that legally has to make the decision. The submission will then be made to the government on the 28th of November, and that will be a submission of a plan based upon a shared understanding of the opportunities, of the costs, of the potential benefits, which will have been put together by all the councils. As I've said, there will be some options, and each council will be required to select which of those options it supports. That will then be submitted to the government. After that, the deadline, the dates get a little less certain. The expectation is that the government will consult people of Hertfordshire on the potential arrangements in the spring of next year, and that sometime in the summer of next year, the Secretary of State will make a decision about what should happen, and that could be to select any one of the options that the councils of Hertfordshire have proposed, or indeed it could be to select another option that we haven't proposed, and that's probably not very likely. Assuming that happens on those timescales, the current expectation is that there would be elections to what are known as shadow unitary authorities in May 2027. So the people elected to those shadow councils would be responsible for deciding how those councils would operate, how they would deliver services, their governance arrangements. So to put all those details in place in parallel with the existing councils continuing to operate, and then responsibility for delivering the services would be switched over from the existing councils to the new ones on vesting day, which, assuming this timetable continues unchanged, would be the 1st of April 2028. And from then on, the new unitary councils would be responsible for delivering services across Hertfordshire. There would clearly be some services where there would need to be quite a lot of work done after that date in order to complete the transition, because, for example, existing councils will have contracts with suppliers and they won't end on that day, they will continue. So in some areas, in some services, it will take some time to produce the final result, but the new councils will be responsible for it from that vesting day on the 1st of April. Can we go to the next slide, please? I think I covered a little bit of this earlier in terms of town and parish councils. I mean, legally, the position of town and parish councils, the government has said, will not change. They do want to promote neighbourhood area committees. They recognise that with larger unitary councils that there is a need to maintain community engagement, and neighbourhood area committees are the government's favoured ways of doing that. Clearly in Hertsmere and in much of the rest of Hertfordshire there are town and parish councils existing already, and there is a significant opportunity for the new unitary councils to engage with those, and Hertsmere is clearly talking to the town and parishes in Hertsmere about what the opportunities they present. I think that's an area where what actually happens on the ground will depend not just on the numbers of unitaries and their boundaries, but the decisions that they make about how they will operate. The government has been clear about the need to promote neighbourhood area committees, but those new councils, with the elected members elected in the shadow elections in 2027, will be those who decide how that works in practice. And I think it's very important for them to think about how they are going to maintain engagement with any of the potential options that Jeremy is going to talk about more in a moment. They will all need to think about how they maintain and enhance that level of engagement with individual communities. Jeremy.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, the next few slides are really going to address the meat of this issue in terms of the options that the existing borough districts and county council are taking forward to central government for the future organisation of local government into a number of unitaries in Hertfordshire. You'll recall that at an earlier stage this evening I said that we submitted an interim proposal or initial proposal back in March that contained permutations of 4 different options. The final proposals that we intend to present to government in November will contain not permutations but finalised options around 3 different scenarios. That's because prior to the May local elections, there was an option that I talked about as the mega council option, the single unitary comprising a population of 1.25 million, the only existing local government entity that was promoting and supporting that option was Hertfordshire County Council. As you'll be aware, in the May local elections, we saw a change in the political leadership of Hertfordshire County Council from a Conservative-led authority to a Liberal Democrat-led authority, and that authority took the decision, which I have to say was in line with the views of all of the borough and district councils around Hertfordshire, that the notion of one unitary was simply too big to deliver the kind of local connection that we felt people deserved, and that has now been removed from the list of options being taken to government. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. I don't know if you can actually read the legend on the map. I think we do many things well in local government. We collect hundreds and thousands of bins every week. We deliver huge housing developments, but we're not always great at providing slides that are easy to read. But essentially, this option splits Hertfordshire between east and west, and it would put ourselves, Hertsmere, in the western side of the county, and we would be joining together with the boroughs and districts of Dacorum, St Albans, Watford and Three Rivers to form a unitary authority with a population size of around 615,000, and based on best estimates over the next 20 years, that would grow into a fairly sizable unitary of 722,000. The Eastern Authority, which would comprise of North Herts, Stevenage, East Herts, Broxbourne and Welwyn Hatfield, would start off at around 600,000 and actually grow to be larger than the Western Authority into a unitary council covering around 760,000 local electors. We can move on to the next slide. This is a model that would see 3 unitary authorities across the county. On the left-hand side of the slide, you will see the what would be the new West Herts Council, comprising Dacorum, Watford and Three Rivers. Now, this this model employs the device for which I am going to use the highly technical term of nibbling at the boundaries. You will see the striped purple and green lines, because what is being proposed in this model is that the current county council divisions of North and South Bushy, which are currently, as you will be aware, part of Hertsmere, would effectively be decoupled, if that's the right word, from what's currently Hertsmere and placed into that western unitary to create an initial population size of 386,000, growing to around 463k over the period up to 2045. In the middle, you would have what's left of Hertsmere. I won't call it the rump of Hertsmere, but effectively everything that we currently have, with the exception of North and South Bushy, together with our neighbours in St Albans and Welwyn and Hatfield. Starting population for this new central Herts unitary of 350k, growing to about 415k. Then on the right-hand side, in the sort of reddy purple colour, you'd have North Herts, Stevenage, East Herts and Broxbourne coming together to form a unitary of around 480k, growing quite substantially to over 600,000 over that same 20-year period. If we can move on to the final slide, this would see 4 unitaries across the boundaries or within the boundaries of Hertfordshire, and some slightly more significant boundary changes. Dacorum and St Albans would form what I think we're still calling the West Herts unitary. You can see the population sizes on the screen. Hertsmere would move into a southwest unitary authority together with our neighbours in Watford and Three Rivers. That would incorporate the whole of Hertsmere as we currently exist. Then the sort of turquoisey unitary in the middle would encompass North Hart, Stevenage and Welland and Hatfield councils, but the large areas of shading show that there would be a number of boundary changes. I'm not going to go into the detail of those because most of them don't really impact upon Hertsmere, other than to say that the Northaw and Cuffley wards of Welland and Hatfield, which currently sit not within Hertsmere's local government boundaries, but they are part of Hertsmere's parliamentary seat, or have been since the last general election, would move over to the Eastern Unitary together with East Herts and Broxbourne. So when I said this is about simplification, there are elements of it that mean we have to perhaps delve into greater degrees of complexity before we get the simplification. But by and large, the rationale behind these proposed boundary changes are to achieve a better balance of population sizes within that 4 unitary option. That is the end of this part of the presentation, and we're now going to move to what I think is the sort of crux and perhaps the most important part of this session, which is the opportunity for your questions and feedback. I'm going to pass to Hilary Shade, Hertsmere's Director of Partnerships, who will explain how this is going to work.
Yes, thank you. We've had some questions pre-submitted before the meeting, and we've had some come through on Slido. If you have got questions, there's some blue pieces of paper here. If you just write your question on that, we'll collect them and then we'll feed them through to the panel. So if you're ready for the first question, the question was, who will be responsible for buses and transport services under the new arrangements?
So they're both things the County Council deal with at the moment. The intention is that they would both be the responsibility of the strategic authority in the longer term once that is created. So they would fall under the responsibility of the combined authority led by the Mayor.
Thank you. There's a series of questions now about finances, so I'm going to try and bunch them all together if I can. So one is on merging with other neighbouring authorities, some of whom have debts. Will Hertsmere residents be compensated for the no debt of Hertsmere Council, and will any positive balance be absorbed by the new unitaries, or will the government take on that positive budget position? The second question, sort of related to that, is about unitaries have failed before through lack of funding. What will change? Local authorities are still cash strapped, and will that just mean more automation and less accountability? And then the other one related to that is, I've lost it now, is it just, it sounds like we'll have a mayoral authority the same size as Hertfordshire, plus the unitaries, plus local area committees and town and parish councils. Does that mean we're not really going to see any savings?
I think probably both.
I mean, I'm not aware of the debt position of councils in Hertfordshire. I do know that they all have some significant reserves. What I'm not aware of is whether or not there are significant liabilities. I certainly don't believe that there are any in some of the headline positions that councils like Thurrock and Woking were in. There is clearly going to have to be a division of resources and a conglomeration of resources in any of the potential arrangements that we are proposing. And the new councils will then clearly have to make a decision about how they deal with the position. I don't think, as I said, I don't think we're in the position where any Hertfordshire council's financial position is such that they are going to place any of the new unitaries in significant jeopardy as a result of that. The projections as to what the ongoing financial position of the unitaries are varies with the different models. It becomes more difficult to look at the position the more unitaries there are, because the bulk of the spend by local government is the county council spend on children's and adult social services, and that is of course spread across the county. The funding for the income that funds that is spread across the county, but there are clearly areas where there are more significant spend than others. And the smaller units you break it into, the more carefully one has to consider about whether or not there is a balance between income and expenditure. In terms of unitaries that have failed, I think it's probably fair to say that there are councils of all sorts in the UK that have failed. Northamptonshire County Council failed, Thurrock, which is a unitary, has failed, Croydon, which is a London borough, has failed, and Woking, which is a district, has failed, if we're talking of financial failure. So I'm not sure there's any structural relationship with the connected with the possibility of getting into serious financial difficulty by making some poor decisions. There is clearly an issue about the amount of funding available in local government as a whole. The county council and I think all the districts and boroughs have been forced over the last 10 or 15 years to identify substantial savings, which becomes more and more difficult the further that goes on. Does reorganisation provide a panacea to that? No, absolutely it doesn't. It does provide an opportunity for some savings in some areas by reducing duplication. What the implication of that is, of course, depends on what view the government takes of that. The government is currently reviewing local government funding, and I suspect that if we identify that local government in Hertfordshire is going to be considerably better off as a result of the arrangements, the government will take that into account when considering what funding it provides to local government. So I think it's an opportunity to deal with some of the issues. Do I think it's a panacea? Do I think it will guarantee that we will be able to provide all the services that we would wish to? Absolutely not. It's a different structure with some opportunities, but some of the threats that exist in any local government structure will still be there.
Thanks, Steve. I think just to add a few points to this, I think in terms of, I think it was the first or the second question, it is the case that when you look across the boroughs and districts in Hertfordshire, Hertsmere is the only local authority that currently has no external debt. So you may say that is going to create an inherent unfairness when this is shared out. But it's also the case that Hertsmere as a local authority contains some of the most densely populated areas of multiple deprivation that place a far greater demand on things like adult social care, SEN services and so on. And the way that this will be dealt with is through a process called, that's been dubbed equalisation of resources. It's immensely complex. There aren't straightforward answers. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Does this mean that people around here will probably end up paying more council tax, which is probably what most of you are interested in? The answer is yes. Will the quantum of that increase be vast? No, I don't believe it will, because by and large, the boroughs and districts in this area are financially well managed, and they're not in the kind of close to bankruptcy situation that other local authorities elsewhere in the country that we've heard about have been shown to be. Is it the case that there's a broad principle at play here? Yes, it is. And I think the broad principle is that any of the models that you've seen today on the slides, be it 2 unitaries, 3 unitaries or 4 unitaries, are over time going to deliver more efficiencies and savings and a more sustainable model for local government than we have at the moment. I mean, yes, that's clearly the case, but then there is a debate as to how quickly those savings and efficiencies will accrue, how long it will take to reach the break-even point, because there is clearly a vast cost to this whole process itself. And I'll speak for a moment wearing my hat as the elected finance and investment spokesperson for the District Councils Network, and talk a little bit about the research that we have done. And this isn't a position that's shared by everybody. It's certainly not a position that's probably shared by the County Council, but there is an ample and robust case to be made for the fact that we might not actually see any of the savings that are being talked about for a generation. So this is about thinking in the long term rather than saying that the financial paradigm for local government is going to shift overnight. But I would say that the kind of financial boost that we will see, not to our local government institutions, but perhaps more importantly to our local economy as a whole, to the amount of money that people have in their pockets, will come through the success or failure of Hertfordshire's new directly elected mayor to negotiate a beneficial set of devolution deals and their ability to utilise their powers to boost our local economy, create growth and create employment. So I think that in some ways the target to watch is what happens with the mayoralty, the strategic authority and the devolved services, rather than the specific intricate details of what this means for the budget of your local unitary authority.
Okay, thank you for that. There's a couple now in relation to the different models. So, does the government criteria allow for you to cut across district and borough boundaries? And then linked to that is, will the possible boundary changes actually put the government off from options 3 and 4 unitaries, and by default we end up being 2 unitaries?
I'm going to maybe ask Angie or Sajida to talk about boundary changes vis-a-vis government criteria, and then we'll have a go at the second one.
Thank you very much. If I can start, and I'm sure Sajida will correct me. So the government have been clear that they will consider boundary changes. So it is entirely within our gift to do that. They've equally been clear that that does bring some complexity, which will clearly be something they'll want to give consideration to. And they have required local authorities to set out a very clear justification in terms of economic and social community benefits that the boundary changes would bring. So yes, you can do it, but you have to put together a very strong case for making those changes, and then the Secretary of State will give it consideration. Ultimately, the decision sits with the Secretary of State, not the local authorities. Sajida, I don't know whether you want to add anything.
I mean, I think the question about whether or not that will impact the government's decision, I think the answer has to be that we don't know. And we are even less certain than we were last week, because the minister who was leading all this got sacked on Saturday. So what his successor will think about this and whether or not that will bring about any change, I think is something that we're all anxiously waiting to try and get some indication of. Angie has described what the government's official position is, but it is clear that there are some subtleties around this, which I think we would all like to understand better.
Yeah, look, in terms of whether or not ministers will be put off, last week, before the reshuffle, I think I could have given you a fairly clear answer, because I discussed this with the previous ministerial team, and they were very clear that boundary changes will take longer to deliver, involve the Boundary Commission, cost more, and just add another layer of complexity to an already immensely complex process. They were absolutely willing to consider boundary changes where they made sense, but were very clear that the local authorities proposing options that involve boundary changes would have to work very hard to justify them. Since then, we have a new Secretary of State, we have a new Minister for Local Government. It may well be that they take a slightly different view, so watch this space.
Thank you. The next questions are in relation to the shadow authority. So there will be people elected, members elected to both the shadow authority as well as being elected to the current councils, and possibly the same for staff. How will conflicts of interest be handled, and how will those people be supported during the transition?
At the moment, we are working on it, as well as we are learning from other unitaries which has gone through this. And those conflict of interest will be managed through governance process. Angie, you would like to add anything on that?
Thank you. So the way the government are proposing to deal with shadow elections, once the Secretary of State has determined which local government reorganisational model they want to pursue, they will enact this through a structural change order which goes through the House. And when they put that structural change order in place, as part of that, they will call for the shadow elections based on their current timeline in May 2027. And at the same time, any local elections that are meant to take place in May 2027 will be deferred. And those councillors will have an extra year on their term, and then the new authorities will commence on the 1st of April 2028. Thank you.
I mean, I think it's clear that this transition is not a simple process, and there are some really good points raised there. There will be some councillors who are elected to the shadow authorities who are existing councillors, some of whom who are elected will not. Some of the members of the existing authorities will not be members of the new authority. Those who find themselves on both the shadow authority and the existing authority will clearly need to act in a way that recognises that they're fulfilling different responsibilities in those roles. There is also clearly a complex issue relating to the position of officers, because we need to continue. One of the vital things for this whole process from now until whenever it finishes is we have to recognise that we have to go on providing services for the people of Hertfordshire. We need to go on protecting children who are at risk. We need to go on looking after vulnerable people. We need to go on emptying the bins. All those things need to continue whilst we're going through this process. And there are some considerable costs of doing that. And there are some real issues we have to address in that the number of people with the skills and experience necessary to do that is limited. So getting the extra capability to build the new organisations at the same time as running the existing ones is not going to be a trivial undertaking. And that's one of the reasons why, as Jeremy set out, the any savings are likely to take some time to realise because there are some significant costs in making the change. So it's a really good question, and the answer is it's complicated.
And I think, look, a lot of these things are a double-edged sword. What can absolutely, certainly be characterised on one hand as conflicts of interest can be looked at through a different prism when you take into account the fact that shadow authorities will, in effect, have the power to undo, block and veto major spending decisions and major policy decisions of the existing borough and district councils. So there may well be members of existing borough and district councils who decide to stand for election for those shadow authorities purely to protect the interests of decisions they have made in their current roles at existing authorities. And in many cases, it may be people taking that kind of approach that actually ensures that the legacy commitments, if you like, that many of the borough and district councils will be seeking to stack up over the next few years remain in place and cannot be undone by successor bodies. So there will be an inherent tension between people holding roles in both authorities, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing.
Okay, thank you. The next question follows up, really, is who will be in charge of the local government elections, and who and how will an MP be elected? And then linked to that, will there be is there any suggestion that parliamentary boundaries may need to change as a result of local government reorganisation?
Pass to our resident returning officer.
Thank you very much. Something we will be looking into it. I can't give answer now at this moment, because currently there are 10 returning officers, not 10, 11, including county election.
Yeah, I think I can add to that from my own conversations with ministers that there is no intention at this stage for any reviews of parliamentary boundaries to be wrapped up inside the local government reorganisation process. That's seen as completely separate and distinct.
Thank you. The next question is really about councillors. Do we have any idea what the ward size, the size of electorate for each ward in the unitary authorities, and how many councillors are there likely to be per head of population?
Yes, I mean, the proposal that's made on the 28th of November needs to include some proposals for that. The position is that what's being proposed is that certainly for the 2 and 3 unitary options, that they should be arranged on the basis of a multiple number of councillors for each of the existing county divisions. And the reason for doing that is that they are the same across the entire county. Districts and boroughs have quite widely divergent size wards, and some of them have a combination of 1, 2 and 3 member wards, whereas the county councillors are all elected for broadly the same number of people across the entire county. So the proposal is that 3 councillors should be elected for each of the existing county council divisions. Now, I have to confess, in terms of the 4 unitary option, I think the position is changing, because the 4 unitary option involves some boundaries that cross county council division boundaries, and there's been some investigation about basing that upon modified versions of district wards with different numbers of members, but that could produce some very unequal levels of representation, so that's an issue. And I believe where we've got to at the moment is we're looking at a modified council division version, because it's obviously important not only that there's an adequate level of representation, but councillors represent roughly the same number of people. Otherwise, if you have a smaller electorate, some councillors essentially are overrepresenting people. So there are some complexities around that. That would result, there is also a need to make sure that one lands up with a manageable number of councillors. So in the 2 unitary option, that would land up with, well, I think it's about 120, isn't it? 117 councillors, which is viewed as being something that's achievable. What is likely to happen is that once the new unitaries are established, sometime after that, the Local Government Boundary Commission would then do a review of the levels of representation and the boundaries. That's what's happened in other unitaries that have been created. So those numbers might change. But in order to put forward something that is capable of being implemented in the time scale, the initial number would be based upon existing boundaries. So that would be 100, I'm going to fail to do my maths here. It's 117 each for the 2.
234.
Is 200, yes. And do you happen to know the numbers for the 3?
No.
No, we don't.
More than that.
But clearly the 3 would be more than that in total, but a lower number for each individual council, and similarly with the 4. So there would be significantly more representation than there is at the county council, and somewhat less than there is in the current districts.
Yeah, I think the numbers for the 3 and 4 unitary options range between sort of 70 and 90 per unitary, broadly.
Yeah, that sort of number.
Okay, there's a series of questions about town and parishes. I'll just read the 3, and they're very, very similar. So for areas that do not currently have a town and parish council, you said there were other arrangements being considered. Could you say more about this and when we will know what those arrangements are? And that links to a question about, will the local committee be adequate to represent areas such as Bushy where there is no town or parish council? And the other question about what will the impact of unitary councils be on towns without parish councils, and are there any plans in Hertsmere for Bushy or Potters Bar to set up their own town and parish councils?
Okay, quite a lot there, and sort of since I introduced the councillors who were here at the beginning, just to welcome the leader of Elstree and Boreham Wood Town Council, Richard Butler, and I know there's a town clerk and a number of the town council officers have joined us. I'm not sure if I can see anyone here from any of our other local town and parish councils. Have I missed anybody? No, and it is worth saying that our town and parish councils in Hertsmere have formed a coordinating group to sort of work together and look at the implications of this. Specifics on how the neighbourhood committees will work. Again, this is something that will be addressed, at least at level of principle, in the final proposals document. There are different models being looked at. There are lots of examples of best practice around the country. From my recollection, the model that most of the Hertfordshire districts and boroughs seem to be veering towards was one in which those area neighbourhood committees would have budgets to be spent in the local neighbourhoods, and that they would be comprised of a mixture of elected ward members for those neighbourhoods, plus co-optees or appointees from key local community stakeholders, be they town and parish councils, voluntary sector and third sector organisations, perhaps faith communities and so on. So they would be sort of forums in which the key organisations that make up community in those neighbourhoods would come together, but the decision making would be vested, and any allocation of the budget would be vested in the elected members. In terms of the sort of current scenario and landscape around Hertsmere, as it stands, we have a disparity, it's probably not quite the right word, but a mismatch in that we do have areas like Bushy and Potters Bar that are unparished, and areas that are covered by actually relatively well-resourced town and parish councils that deliver key local services. At the moment, the biggest difference that we see on a day-to-day basis is when it comes to community infrastructure levy allocations, in that those areas with town and parish councils are able to distribute the top slice of that SIL funding, 15 to 25%, depending on various scenarios, directly within their areas in an autonomous way, and they are far less restricted than the boroughs and districts in the rules as to how they distribute that. Whereas when it comes to the areas that are unparished, those funds end up being distributed centrally by the district and borough council. So we already have a scenario in which slightly different rules and a slightly different playing field exists. Now, I think I can say it is the case, and it might be local councillors can correct me if I get this wrong, that in common with other areas of Hertfordshire and other areas of the country, there are certainly active discussions taking place in Bushy to move forward towards a local referendum that would, if successful, result in a local governance review being carried out by ourselves as the borough council with a view to possibly establishing a town council for Bushy. In Potters Bar, it's my understanding that things are slightly more advanced, and that I think the requisite number of signatures have already been obtained on a petition to trigger such a referendum, although that petition hasn't yet been submitted. So we may well see the emergence of new town and parish councils in Hertsmere to cover those unparished areas before local government reorganisation happens. I would say the sands have been shifting slightly in that there were parts of the government actually encouraging that process at the outset of the local government reorganisation debate. I would say we have seen a nuanced but very clear move away from that, and it's not something that government are currently discouraging, but my personal view is kind of the genie is out of the bottle now, and if you were a local resident in one of those areas that attached a high value to localism and community connection and so on, why wouldn't you want to at least explore establishing a town or parish in the areas where they don't currently exist? But others may have different views.
The next question is around, has any thought been given to organising to be coterminous or better aligned with health structures? And similarly, there is a question about where do the police fit in to these arrangements? And another question about, are we allowed to consider just the status quo?
I mean, one of the issues in alignment with health structures is, of course, that health structures are rather changeable at the moment. At the highest level, the integrated care system is clearly being restructured on a much bigger basis than Hertfordshire. In terms of neighbourhood health provision, there are structures which align reasonably with both the 2 and the 4 unitary options, and struggle a little more in terms of alignment with the 3 unitary option. We've had conversations with health along with a lot of other stakeholders, and including the police, and indeed I had a discussion with the Chief Constable last week. The police, as some of you will know, are currently in the process of restructuring their arrangements on a north, east and southwest Hertfordshire arrangement, much along the lines of the 2 unitary proposal. But as the Chief Constable says, they will work with whatever local government structures are put in place. So the position is that there are, I think, probably closer alignment between what's happening with the 2 and the 4 than there is with the 3, but that all our partners, whatever structures they're working with, tell us that they are perfectly capable of working with whatever structures are decided are appropriate for Hertfordshire.
Just because we can't agree on everything, I have a slightly different perspective. I mean, neighbourhood health structures matter, and Steve's right to point out that they do broadly work with most of the models that we posited earlier. But I think when most people think about health provision, what they're really concerned about is GP primary care provision. And of course, GP provision is commissioned by the NHS integrated care boards. In Hertfordshire, we obviously saw a few years ago the sort of Hertfordshire-focused Three Valleys CCG expand into an ICB covering Herts and West Essex. I think many of us felt that was in itself a retrograde step. We've seen in recent weeks plans solidify to increase the size of that even further and to effectively split into a bifurcated sort of 2 ICB model. I think it's fair to say that none of the options under consideration for ICR for LGR fit nicely or comfortably with those plans for ICB restructuring and health provision. And my own personal view is that it's a problem. It doesn't have to be an insurmountable problem, but I don't think it's a problem that will be addressed until those shadow authorities are set up and are able to actually get into dialogue with the care boards. And I do think it creates a precarious situation around areas like this where we're actively campaigning for much needed additional GP provision right now to address an existing deficit in parts of this area. I think that there is also an additional dimension around the impact of this process on health provision, which is at the moment it's the borough and district councils that are responsible for preventative health, which we know is immediate investment for long-term benefit. Because of the merging of the financial pot and the increased demands that will be created by adult social care and SEN, it's self-evident to me that there will be less money available for preventative health work, because that's often paid for through discretionary funding. And I think that that creates a really serious long-term problem, because every penny spent now on preventative health saves the NHS 10 times as many pennies down the line.
Can I just come back on a couple of points there? I mean, currently there is an integrated care board who Jeremy is right, are responsible for commissioning GP services that covers Hertfordshire and a piece of Essex. And I agree absolutely, that never seemed like a sensible arrangement. The proposal is that ICBs will be merged, and the intention is that Hertfordshire will have an ICB along with what was Bedfordshire, is several unitaries, and Cambridgeshire. So there will be a substantially larger ICB. That's driven by the fact that ICBs have been told that they have to reduce their operational expenditure by 50%, or their overhead expenditure by 50%. And there's some real concern about the impact that's going to have. I personally have some concerns that they will be increasingly focused on delivering of health services that generate headlines, and we know that much of what they do working with councils is on the preventative areas, the areas that ensure that people don't land up being statistics for A&E performance in hospitals. So there's some real concerns, I think, about what the change to ICBs is going to mean for Hertfordshire. But given that there is going to be an ICB that covers far more than Hertfordshire, I'm not entirely certain that how we're structured within Hertfordshire will greatly affect that process. I think in terms of ill health prevention, we should talk about, I guess, in general. You know, the County Council is responsible for public health, which is a significant part of that. That's something that will become the responsibility of the new unitaries. And I agree absolutely that we need to make sure that there continues to be investment in what local government can do in terms of promoting good health. We need to work with the health service. And the health service has a 10-year plan that's supposed to be focused on that. We need to make sure we're working with them. Local government's contribution to that is a fairly small part of the total, but that doesn't mean it's not important. And I think that if a new structure didn't achieve that, then I think that would be a serious problem.
So we were asked whether we could say that we preferred the status quo in terms of local government reorganisation. That is technically not an option on the table, so the Secretary of State has asked each local authority, the County Council and the 10 districts, to state their preferred model, so whether it's the 2, the 3 or the 4 unitaries. I guess it remains open to any council not to respond or to respond and say they don't want any of those and they'd prefer the status quo. However, it is a decision for the Secretary of State, and this government have been clear that they think unitarisation is the way forward. Thank you.
And I think that the white paper or the bill actually now gives the government statutory power to do local government reorganisation to areas that resist effectively. So they do have the legal power to override any attempt to hold out and maintain the status quo.
There are a number of observations that are we just not simply creating another 2-3 tier arrangements with the strategic authority, the unitary and the town and parishes? There are a number of observations like that. Some very more specific questions. How will social care services be split between the unitaries?
Should I take the multiple tier? I mean, the answer is yes and no. I think the key point about strategic authorities, and there's an interesting debate if you talk to any of the existing directly elected mayors around the country, they don't sit within the local government association, and they have been increasingly explicit about the fact that they do not see themselves or their authorities as part of local government. They would argue, and in fact one of the biggest proponents of this is Claire Ward, the directly elected mayor of West Midlands, who was actually a former leader of Elstree and Borehamwood Town Council in the earlier days of her career. They would argue that when strategic authorities are acting at their most effective, they are a step between local government and national government. So that's broadly the view of the existing strategic authorities and local mayors, and I do see a sense of coherence in that argument. Will town councils effectively end up becoming a replacement for the current sort of tier of government that borough and district councils represent? Yes, there is a risk that that might happen, but of course, without broad statutory responsibilities, town councils do have the ability to, I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but to effectively cherry pick the services that they want to deliver and get involved in. And perhaps that's one of their strengths, and perhaps that's why they are able to focus on specific areas and do them really well. I think we have good examples of that in Elstree and Boreham Wood, where we have an authority that's focused on the creative sector and entertainment side of things. They do other stuff, but clearly they've taken a specialism and developed that. In Shenley, we've got a local authority that sought to specialise in sort of street scene and local parks. So I think there is a difference. I think town and parish councils will probably continue to have that much sharper, more angular focus on areas of interest, even if they end up being the physical port of call and the door through which people end up going to in the local neighbourhood to engage with local government when buildings like this are no longer in that position.
Before we just go to social services, can I just follow up with a linked question, which is, can we decide locally what stays in the unitary and what goes into the mayoral authority? So around those bigger areas of concern like social care, public health, etc.
Other members of the panel, please feel free to contradict me, but I think that you will be able to influence those decisions in terms of being able to vote for a directly elected mayor. We will have candidates, I presume, from all the main parties and perhaps beyond, and they will set out their plans in terms of the kind of services that they will want to be bidding to have devolved to them and their authorities. So that is where you will be able to influence the scope of the strategic authority.
Thank you. Then, and to the question about social care services, how will they be split within the unitaries?
If I just make a comment on the other question as well. I mean, I think there's certainly an accusation that this lands up with the same number of levels. I mean, I think that there is a good argument that there are things that need to be done at a more strategic level, which the strategic authority will be better equipped to do. We talked earlier about responsibilities for transport, and I think we all recognise that our interest in transport doesn't neatly align with local government boundaries. A lot of the public transport in Boreham Wood, in particular, comes over the boundaries from London. And this isn't going to change that, but absolutely we need to take a more strategic view on some things. I think I'd hoped that there was a real opportunity for government to stop doing some things centrally that would be better done at a lower tier. I'm not clear the extent to which that's going to happen in practice. I think it's talked that it might be a possibility, but we don't know to what extent that will be realised. At the other end, I hope that there were some real opportunities, particularly for larger town councils, to play a bigger role in their communities, reflecting the fact that the unitaries that sat above them would be bigger than the districts. I don't think that's part of the envisaged model, so it will be down to individual towns to decide if they want to do more. So I think there's certainly a potential outcome where town councils pick up more of the local activities and the strategic authority picks up some of the more strategic stuff, leaving unitaries doing what both the current tiers do. And that could produce, I think, some community benefits and some economic benefits. Whether or not it's the way that it actually turns out, I think, remains to be seen. In terms of social services, social care, as I said earlier, that represents by far the biggest piece of local government spending in Hertfordshire. It will, unless the government decides otherwise at some time in the future, be the responsibility of the unitary authorities, and they will have some statutory responsibilities, and they will have to employ some professionals who have particular responsibilities for children's care and for children's services and for adult social care. There is the opportunity for councils either essentially for the existing county council service to be divided up. There is the potential for some joint operation of services. One of the issues in terms of that is that it will represent an enormous proportion of the budget of any of the unitary authorities. And there is, I think, a real concern about an authority that finds itself without any discretion over perhaps 70% of its budget, because they've agreed it will all be delivered on a combined basis. I personally also have some concerns about delivering things in that way, but it ceases to be clear who is responsible for them. If all the councils are cooperating on something, cooperation's a wonderful thing, but we need to understand what responsibilities are. So I think that there are some clear issues about saying, well, actually, we'll continue to run it the same way as it is. It'll just be the responsibility of several councils. Equally, there are some challenges in terms of dividing the service up. Currently, the services are planned on a Hertfordshire-wide basis. Can we divide them? Yes, we certainly can. Will that have some transitional issues? Absolutely, it will. There'll be some things where things don't happen in the parts of the county that they relate to, and the unitaries will need to arrange that. But social services will be the responsibility of the unitary councils, and deciding whether or not they deliver them individually or in cooperation will likewise be a responsibility of those unitary councils.
In a similar vein, there's a question about what happens to all the various multi-year contracts that exist across the councils. Will they be novated to the new authorities? And the example that's cited is about multiple bin providers in a unitary authority.
Yes, I think there's a simple answer.
Then there are some questions in relation to planning about how can we align planning processes and approvals, ensuring the appropriate infrastructure around planning developments. And there was another similar one around how do you overcome 11 councils with political differences in relationship to planning?
Look, in terms of planning, actually, it's an interesting one because look, I'm a big believer in sub-regional planning. I think if you are going to really achieve the ability to deliver on a vision for an area and deliver growth, the district and borough areas that we have right now are actually too small to implement planning policies around. And this was already recognised 5 years ago in Hertfordshire when we established 2 sub-regional planning groups looking at what are called joint strategic plans, one in southwest Hertfordshire and one in northeast and central Herts. In the southwest, that joint strategic plan has already been through a Regulation 18 consultation process and is actually quite well advanced. So in Hertfordshire, we already have the makings of at least in this part of Hertfordshire, we already have the makings of a sort of joined up planning system. Now, it is my understanding, and certainly nothing's been said so far to contradict what we were told at the outset of this process, is that existing local plan geographies will be retained, i.e. the local plans for each of the existing districts and boroughs will continue to hold significant planning weight within the boundaries that they currently cover until such a time as the most recently adopted expires. That's the formulation that we were given when we asked this to ministers at a very early stage. But I think broadly it means that there will be a very long extended process by which we sort of morph from the district and borough focused local plans, which will continue to be the primary source of planning policies in addition to the NPPF for each of the existing geographical areas. And over time, probably potentially, given that some of us are still due to adopt new local plans over the next couple of years, it will take sort of somewhere between 15 and 20 years for that to truly transition into a sort of proper sub-regional set of planning policies. So we will see change on that front, and I think it will be positive change. It will make things more coherent. But at the same time, those of you who have been involved in working hard to fight for particular planning policies in your own geographies can rest assured that those will continue to hold weight at planning committees within the new unitary councils when they consider applications within the existing borough and district geographies.
Thank you. I've another specific question about what will happen to significant assets like the film studios. Is there a risk of valuable assets built up by the districts being sold off to cover service costs?
Yeah, there's a risk, but I only speak on behalf of our administration here at Hertsmere and say we consider it an absolute in terms of the duty that we have as the current elected representatives of people in this borough to safeguard the future of critical local assets for local people in what is currently Hertsmere. I think it should be obvious why I don't want to go into detail in a forum like this as to the steps that we intend to take to achieve that, but it is absolutely an active and live concern. We are not for 1 minute, and I think I speak across the political spectrum here, are absolutely not for 1 minute going to allow a situation to emerge where a future unitary authority can concrete over assets like Elstree Film Studios that mean so much to this area.
Thank you. Then there's just a couple of final questions, something that's very specific, which is around on the slide on the 4 outcomes. I don't know if you can go back to that slide, Jyoti. On the 4 outcomes, what was the population size for South West in that 4 option?
Current size is 307,881, growing to 371,000 over the 20 years.
Lovely, thank you. And just somebody would like some clarification about what do we mean when we refer to Bushy South?
Bushy South is currently one of the county council electoral divisions, so it's one of the areas which returns currently a single county councillor. So yeah, it's an existing electoral division.
Sorry, follow up on that question. Will the 4 unitary option mean that South West might go into London if they did a London borough reorganisation?
Oh, I wondered why the word London hadn't been mentioned yet. Okay, I can say a few things on this. We're obviously very alive here at Hertsmere to the ongoing debate, particularly pressed from areas like Boreham Wood and Potters Bar, neighbouring London Borough of Barnet, London Borough of Enfield, London Borough of Harrow, and so on, as to why we simply can't become part of the GLA. I think it's true and it's fair to say that the appetite for that kind of a move isn't perhaps the same in Bushy, and I think it's fair to say that there are differing opinions in Radlett and Shenley. Nevertheless, support for that is fairly vocal, if not overwhelming. To that end, without 1 moment wishing to derail the really productive work that's been done collaboratively across all of the councils in Hertfordshire, I did feel that we had a responsibility to at least explore whether or not the current framework for local government reorganisation would enable us to enter into any kind of exploratory conversations with either the GLA or London boroughs. Gida, on my behalf, wrote to officials in central government, and I think it's not an unreasonable characterisation of the response to say that after quite a long time, they wrote back and said, we don't know, can we have some more time to think about this? We haven't really received a substantive response since. So I took it to the Minister and actually to the Secretary of State as well. And what they said made a great deal of sense to me, actually, which was that at this point, the focus for local government reorganisation is on the two-tier areas, and that is a big and complex project in its own right, and it's going to take an awful lot to deliver that. There remains not just an ambition, but actually a stated intention, albeit without a timeline, for a third phase of local government reorganisation to take place, addressing the remit powers make-up of GLA, the Mayor of London and the London boroughs. And it needs to happen because actually, despite the GLA perhaps being the first model and the pilot project for devolution, it's now got to a point where actually it has, I believe it's correct to say, the least amount of devolved powers and authority out of any devolved local government institution anywhere in the country. So it needs to be addressed. And it's obviously not possible to have a two-track situation where boroughs and districts surrounding London enter into negotiations and discussions with London boroughs if those London boroughs and the GLA are itself about to be reformed. However, they did say that if you are a borough or district council that has shared boundaries with a number of London boroughs and you end up in a unitary that continues to have such shared boundaries and has a sizable amount of geography inside the M25, then once they have embarked upon and possibly completed phase 3, in the future, there may well be the possibility for that conversation to take place. So, in my mind, when I look at the maps that we saw earlier, certainly not just in the back of my head, but a very active and live consideration is, do any of those maps close off the possible long-term future option to hold conversations with London, or do any of them lend themselves to that kind of a conversation? In the meantime, and quite separately from that, we continue to, in Hertsmere, have a very strong relationship with our neighbouring London boroughs and the GLA, and all of the issues that I've spoken about at length before in terms of the anomalies around being in Zone 6 in much of the borough but not getting the benefits of student fares and discounted travel cards, and the issues around where Met Police and Herts Police boundaries rub up against each other in the same areas at different levels of service. All of those conversations go on, and we look to develop the most productive set of relationships and arrangements that we can with our London neighbours. But at the moment, it's from outside of the structures of the GLA.
Thank you. I think two last questions, really. You have said that unitary authorities will have to consult with residents before making decisions. How will that be? And that you've also said earlier that that it'll be people-centred and you'll be discussing with residents before making decisions. How will that happen with a unitary authority? And then a final one about this process, but I'll come back to that after you've...
So, in terms of the establishment of the unitaries, then the government will be doing some further consultation before that happens. So legally, the unitaries will be required to consult in the same way as districts and boroughs do. So they will have the same framework. The shadow authorities will have to decide how they want to operate in that way. As Jeremy has said, the proposal will set out some of the aspects of community engagement that we are proposing, but ultimately it will be for those new authorities to decide how they operate, how they engage with people. They will have exactly the same formal consultation requirements as councils do at the moment. And we all know that councils across the country operate in very different ways in terms of their willingness and desire and practice in terms of consultation. Now, I have my views about what I would like to happen in terms of community engagement and consultation, and I expect they're not a lot different from Jeremy's. Will the new authorities do that? I guess the simple answer has to be that depends who gets elected to them.
On that note, there is a question around, is this engagement that can influence this session, influence the outcomes and decisions? And if so, how much weighting will communities' view have?
Sorry, is this engagement or is this engagement?
This engagement.
Okay, so look, I think this engagement is a process that's been engaged in by all of the boroughs and districts, plus the county, plus the Police and Crime Commissioner. I know that Steve and Angie probably have the thankless task of doing 11 different sessions like this in various parts of the county. We have certainly invested a serious amount of our corporate comms resource into promoting it. You will see from the slide that is now up on the screen, there are multiple ways that you can engage through the website. There is a microsite, there are survey links, there are QR codes, there are, I think, paper copies of the survey available this evening for people that aren't or aren't comfortable with it engaging online. There is an email address up there that you can take down and send your views to. There is a vast amount of time and effort being put into genuinely and sincerely reaching out to local people. I think, you know, as a council leader, there are many issues on which you have a platform that you stand on when you're elected, and you broadly are fairly determined to pursue those issues in line with your electoral platform. There are other issues on which your party has a position, and you will broadly pursue those issues in line with your party's position. But then there are issues that surmount all of that. And I think this is one of them. It wasn't an issue that any of us, when we were elected to Hertsmere Borough Council in 2023, expected to be contending with. It's not an issue, or at least the details of this are not an issue that any of our parties are sort of breathing down our necks to take absolutely explicit and particular positions on. It's an issue on which we all genuinely, and that's why you've got councillors from all parties here today, want to, but need to hear the views of local people to shape the responses that we put into this process in order to get out of it what you need. And uniquely, because this authority won't continue to exist, we don't have any skin in the game as far as our current roles are concerned. So it's my view, and I think the sort of cross-leader discussions involving leaders from the three main political parties in this area, representing all different districts, boroughs and county, have been some of the not just the most productive, but the most meaningful political conversations I've ever been engaged in, precisely because it's a genuine journey with no predetermined outcomes, where everybody is actually really concerned with trying to reflect what their residents want. And that sometimes results in strange alliances and strange shared views appearing across the room. So yeah, I think this process really does have the opportunity to influence outcomes, or certainly to influence the nature of the final proposals that we put forward to government. It will then be up to central government and our MPs to influence the final outcomes. Add anything to that?
Yes, I mean, I think in terms of influence that this process has, are we going to submit any options other than the 2, 3 or 4? I think that's not going to take place, because what we have collectively done is to say, within the parameters that the government has set us, what are the ways in which it could work? And it wouldn't be reasonable for us to come to the people of Hertfordshire with a proposal that we didn't think could be made to work. So we've got three options as to how things should operate. What I think we are learning in these engagement activities is to understand the issues that concern people, that may have some influence over how some councils and some councillors view those options, as to which ones they think are the best set of compromises, because they all involve compromises. I think that one of the things that the process can get very focused on is where you draw the lines on the maps and how many lines you draw. And I think that it's quite clear that those are certainly not the only and maybe not the most important considerations. And what you do within those lines is probably more important than where the lines are. And I think we're certainly getting some interesting feedback about what concerns people in those areas. And there is still time to shape the final submission in terms of how we set out how the councils of Hertfordshire could work. Now, absolutely it's the case that it's the Secretary of State's decision as to what will happen. But what I think we have to do, all of us, is to make a set of proposals about what we think should happen. Because it's much better to set out one stall to say this is how we think it should work. Maybe the Secretary of State won't agree with us, but I think if we set out a compelling set of arguments, there's a good chance they will. And it's much better to be collectively a participant in these decisions and to have things done to one, which is why I think we need to make the best set of proposals we can for Hertfordshire, choosing the best, what we believe are the best set of what are inevitably compromises. And then we will have to leave it up to the government to decide whether or not they agree with us that those are the best solutions to Hertfordshire. And those who wish to become involved in the new system, either those who stand for election or those who work for the new authorities, will have to make whatever the Secretary of State decides should happen work for the benefit of the people of Hertfordshire.
Thank you, Steve. And on that note, with about a minute to spare, huge thanks to Steve, Angie and Sajida. Thank you to all of you, both those watching online and those who've participated in person. I know this can be a highly complex and technical subject, so thank you for sticking with us for all 2 hours of this session. And please do take the opportunity to complete the questionnaire, fill in the survey. If people would like to fill in paper versions, they are at the back. And please do feel that, and I'm sure the same goes for Steve and all of the councillors in the room, that if you do have sort of further views or want to have further conversations around this issue, our doors are open, our email addresses are on the respective websites, and we are incredibly keen to keep the channels of communication open. So please do reach out on this, and thank you again, everybody.